Okay, welcome to Christine Bond, who is a psychologist. So thanks for joining me, Chris. Would you like to just share a little bit about your role as a psychologist and the types of work that's out there? And we'll go from there.
Well, hi everyone. I have been a psychologist for a long time now, but it was a third career change, so I didn't start practicing fully until about 2005. And I come under the umbrella, I suppose, all psychologists do, of the term allied health. And differentiates psychologists from others, I suppose, is that we're presumably experts in human behaviour. That's our focus. And we try to help people change the way they think, feel and behave and react when those problems are giving them difficulties. Psychologists study the brain, memory, learning and processes development. And psychological treatments can be used to help individuals, families and groups, organisations. I took that definition, it's actually a straight definition there, from Allied Health Professionals Australia. But yes, we're part of the Allied Health Group. If you see us amongst the, as listed under the AHPRA, the Australian Health Professionals Board, we have to be registered with them to be able to practice. But myself, I'm a member of the APS and the AAPI, which is another group, support group or professional college. The Australian psychology people that I'm with, the term of a generalist psychologist. When I advertise my services, I call myself a psychologist. So there's lots of names, but psychology itself is basically a study of human nature. And what we do is try and learn how to help difficult people function better. That's our job, basically, our focus. As I said, I'm under a division. There are about 9 colleges in the APS, and I'm not a member of any particular college. However, I am under a division of what they call a division, general psychology practices. It's a group that actually looks after the interests for generalist psychologists such as myself. So there's many different colleges, and psychology is such a diverse profession. And there are 9 different colleges, as I might have said, and everywhere from if you're a member of perhaps the clinical neuropsychologist group, right down to sport and exercise psychologists. There's health psychologists, forensic psychologists, community psychologists, counselling psychologists, organisation, just to mention a few of the 9. So there's a lot of different areas that you can actually choose to specialise in. I've chosen to specialise in anything. I'm just a generalist. And sometimes you have to have specific qualifications. In other words, you have to do a master's in clinical psychology to be able to practice in and be a member of that clinical college. But I'm just a generalist. I'm very happy with that. I see a lot of people face to face and just work with general issues.
Now, you've talked about the fact that if you want to specialise in one of those 9 schools you mentioned, you might do a master's in that particular area or even a PhD. These days, the training pathway is quite long for psychology. But even as a generalist psychologist, you have ongoing professional development each year. And I know you've done training in a number of areas. Would you like to mention a couple of those areas you've done specialist training in as a generalist?
Oh gosh, I've done a lot. Of course, CBT was always the basis. That's the basis of any counselling as far as I'm concerned. So I basically consider myself a cognitive behavioural therapist. You study how people think and how that impacts their feelings and how that affects their body, even how their body reacts to the stress hormones that circulate when we're under stress or we're feeling anxious or depressed. Different, the body responds to those thoughts. So I include that part. The cognitive part is just our thoughts. The behavioural part is how our thoughts drive our behaviour. But of course, that includes a lot more. Cognitive psychologists include things like spiritual aspects, the higher self or the core self, that I sort of like to think of as the glue that holds our thoughts, our feelings, our bodily responses, and then that drives our behaviour. I think that's all part of cognitive behavioural therapy these days. But that's my basis. And then I got really interested in internal family systems therapy, which is it's not about family systems therapy, by the way. This is all your own internal parts that seem to talk to you, those voices in your head. And that was a profound learning experience for me, because we've all got hurt parts from the past that tend to hijack us as adults. We wonder why we get upset when someone says something or does something, and that part can hijack the nice, quiet self that you normally are, the person you really want to be and who you really are. And we can embarrass ourselves by perhaps even going off, or sometimes when we know it was trivial. But that's a part hijacking us. So that was really interesting. And that's where I got interested in an ego state therapy. Before then, we all have little egos inside of us that are the same thing as a part. Yeah, really a part. And look, I could go into that therapy. It's really fascinating. We have manager parts and we have firefighters when we go and eat a whole chocolate cake when we can't handle it. And we've got parts that are critical parts, that internal pathological critic, when you kick yourself when you've said the wrong thing. They're all parts that tend to hijack us and cause us problems. So that's where my work is, to look at and analyse patterns and parts. But then I got very interested in EMDR therapy, which is eye movement desensitization reprogramming therapy. If anyone wants to know a lot more about that, you really have to get on the internet. But basically, it's using bilateral stimulation, whether it's tapping or eye movement, getting the client to lift
both sides of the body.
Yeah, using the whole body.
Techniques.
Accessing right and left brain processing. The tapping right and left actually opens up neural networks so that the sensory, which is the unconscious, if you like, the sensory memories that may not have been adaptively processed when a trauma happens.
Might be familiar with tapping,
that's emotional freedom techniques. It's all playing into that same idea, but EMDR is very specific. It's a very good trauma therapy. You get the person to relax and then bring up a memory that was traumatic for them. It's difficult. You have to be very sensitive to the client's willingness to go there. They may not be ready. So you have to teach a lot of grounding and stuff to them, so that if they get triggered or something comes up in between sessions, they've got somewhere to go to feel safe again. And I always say, well, look, if you have a really bad day, text me and I'll ring you at night. Just when you're doing trauma therapy, it's really important for a client to know that once you start that journey, that you're going to be there for them and try and see them through, so until they're finished therapy, which hopefully they won't get triggered anymore by these parts that are not bad parts. They're just parts that are trying to help you cope. Every part, according to Richard Schwartz, who is the internal family systems therapy, he said all parts are welcome. They've all got a voice. They've all got a say. But sometimes we go through life shoving those parts down because we don't like them very much, and so we try to look normal on the outside, but every now and then they just need to be able to be heard. And that's the respect for your own inner family system and love of your own self. Those parts are not bad. They're just younger parts that perhaps don't know how to express themselves as adult parts. Yeah.
So that's work is integrating those therapies and getting people to accept even the parts of themselves they don't necessarily like so much, and working parts to get them to be more productive or healthy, to work towards more healthy behaviours and ways of managing that.
And EMDR is a very effective, but I just still use good old CBT to explore what neural networks light up. When you said that, really upset me. So what's going on in there? There's schemas or patterns or my mental maps that I've learned as a child, that danger, that might be activated, and we need to know those patterns so that we know ourselves. I think one of the great philosophers, I can't remember, it was one of the early Greeks or Shakespeare, I must admit, probably Shakespeare stole it from the Greeks, but know thyself. Know thyself. It's so important. And if you don't know your parts, you really feel out of control when they tend to hijack you, and you've had something happen in your adult life now or your real life now, and you feel just totally overwhelmed. So that's really important. But
some of that mindfulness practice,
yeah,
the
mindfulness,
not judging.
yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the simplest techniques, I still believe so strongly, the simplest techniques are the best. Not a lot of jargon. People don't want a lot of jargon. They just want help now. So if you can do a nice relaxation session when someone comes to you highly anxious and give them a tool to go away with, they come and think it's a wonderful session, but you might have just done something that you think you do routinely, but for them, they don't have that tool. It's wonderful for them. You think, oh, I just teach it to everybody, but they think it's marvellous because they didn't have
it's
knowledge.
empowering people really too. Educating and empowering people to have better awareness of themselves and control over their behaviours. And I know that you've done work with pain as well, and I think that's a really incredible use of psychology. Is that an EMDR strategy or an integrated?
EMDR, I've used EMDR with pain, and it's really fascinating when you think about your whole nervous system, which signals to the brain you've got pain. We're connected by our nervous system right straight up to the master switch up here. And I think that that's really fascinating because I'll do EMDR with pain and they'll say, oh, I haven't got pain now, but I've got tingling all over my body, or my arms tingling. And so we do bilateral stimulation. What's that mean to you? Just stick with that. Keep going with it. And they'll often say, that's weird. I haven't got pain anymore, but I got this tingling. What does that mean? I'll just say, well, your nerves are talking to one another. Sorry. I've got a pretty awful cold at the moment. But yeah, your whole nervous system is, connecting, and with the bilateral stimulation, you're actually making the body or the brain or the whole nervous system calm down a little. Or alarm systems out. And a pain is, you never ever try and take someone's pain away, but you want to reduce it. Pain is a signal that there could be something still wrong there. But EMDR is really good with chronic pain where there's no inflammation anymore. All the medical examinations that the person should have done, if there's no indication that that part should be signalling pain, then often it becomes what we call chronic pain, and it's locked in the neural networks, and that's where EMDR can really help the brain learn again that it's okay. It doesn't have to, react so badly or have such high levels of pain. We teach people to turn the knob down on the pain if it comes up to.
I'm sure that's a whole nother conversation in itself. It's I know you've got such a diverse work spectrum of work that you do.
And I think a big
generalist. Sorry, go ahead.
A big misconception about, I've got to say this for my professional colleagues as well as myself, a big misconception about psychologists is we just sit down and have a cup of tea and talk to people. That is not so. I do a lot of screening and testing, report writing up stuff for court cases, which I've got a few going at the moment. I have to provide notes, of course, with the client's concerned
ethics side of it,
information, work with the client to protect their rights. There is so much legal stuff in the background, and report writing and screening and testing to write reports for doctors or whatever. So that's just counselling is just a fraction of a psychologist's work.
Yeah, and on that, now students preparing, if someone, I know you didn't do psychology straight out of school, and we'll get to your pathway in a second, but if a student was at school today, they can actually study things like psychology and legal studies. Mathematics is important for psychology as well, isn't it? Because you do statistics in psychology, and English because you're going to be doing report writing. Are there any other subjects you think might be useful, like biology for all the clinical stuff that you do?
Yeah, look, there's quite a few pathways as far as subject choice, etc., in schools within the university. So I started off doing social science because that was all I could do. online, I think, and attend uni. When I first started Mackay, there was nothing much available. It was a very small uni. So I did that, but it wasn't really for me. I did some legal studies like family law, which could put me in good stead ever since. Just a couple of subjects on family law that social workers probably get more as their part, but I swapped over to a science degree because I do have a love of science. I guess that's my first love. And science really in the Western world anyway started with the Greeks, mathematics, even the philosophy side of how to think again. It all came from the Greeks. And I had a great love of physics even when I was a child. I used to watch Sumner Miller. I used to love anything to do with thinking, why we think the way we do. Maybe I was a bit of a strange kid. I was very reflective, but that was because of my background. We're all different, which is great. But I really love philosophy. If I could have studied that, but I didn't. And art. I loved art. Art subjects. I did sculpture and painting before I did psychology. So you can do anything, but I think sometimes you just have to have a taste of a few things before you find your pathway. And I did love science, and I guess I don't know why. I like the factual side of it. Why is this so, as Sumner Miller would say? I wanted the facts. I didn't want any airy-fairy stories and metaphor and all that sort of stuff's great when you do therapy, but I wanted to know why that was just the way I was. And I did the science degree, psychology, and then I transferred over to another uni because I couldn't do science and an honours degree because the lecturer left that university. I did through USQ, and I went to Charles Sturt University, and I could do a social science in psychology there. But when I did my thesis there, it was actually a laboratory-based one, which I chose deliberately because I like facts and I could actually test and get results, concrete results. And that's where a little bit of maths helps. You don't have to be the greatest maths person in the world, but it helps, because I went to school. I'm an older clinician. Statistics wasn't even a mathematical entity. That wasn't an approach that came in a lot later. And so I had to teach myself right from the start, but I got it because I like facts. And I did a laboratory-based thesis called on evaluative conditioning. And it was straight, what do you call it? Not qualitative, it was quantitative. And I like that. It's just it's just the way things fell for me. But
those who aren't familiar with those terms, qualitative or quantitative, qualitative looks at qualities of data, so colour, smell, feelings, explanations, whereas quantitative is looking at numbers, so very much data driven.
And I must say, when I got to Charles Sturt, I got a shock because I was back to social science and essay writing, whereas at USQ doing a science degree, I just had to answer questions. And I did have to draw a picture for one guy, because he said if you can draw a creative, integrative picture of the therapy, then you will be able to, you have an artistic ability to create
creativity.
That was his reasoning. I was a bit cranky because, I thought I was just going to get a test. But when I went to Charles Sturt, I really thought, oh no, I've got to write essays again. But I wrote something about, I sort of like sci-fi. I'm a bit of a fan of sci-fi. And I wrote an essay about Data. I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the character of Data. And I sort of framed Star Trek. He's the robot or the bionic man who longs to be human.
The doctor, isn't he?
He longs to be human. And I sort of wrote a counter that we're humans longing to be more efficient and more like a robot. So there was that play, and I got a great mark for that. And I thought, oh, well, it's not so bad, writing about essays. I could still use Star Trek, which is very scientific based, by the way, and still integrate that. So I guess no matter what you do, no matter what pathway you do, you'll learn something. And the key to that is just keep learning. Even now, I mean, I'm 74 in a week or so. I'm still working pretty well full time. And at the moment, I'm doing a grad diploma in clinical or medical hypnosis, which is another world again, so
And
don't
it's
stop.
another tool, your toolkit, isn't it? Because
And
you
another
use
toolkit.
it as therapy.
Yeah, and it's not that I'm trying to prove that I'm the best at anything. I think it's a journey for me, along with my clients, that what's the next step that we can use to, integrate this into my practice? What's the next best thing that might be helpful? Yeah.
So now you've done it was a Bachelor of Science. You ended up
Bachelor of Science,
undergrad. It was a Bachelor of Science.
Bachelor of Science.
Your Bachelor of Honours was
Psychology,
in social science.
social science, brackets psychology, brackets honours. And
at the time you finished, you could get qualified as a psychologist doing 2 years of supervision.
Yeah, 2 years of supervision and like 2 years provisional. And that was the 4-2 pathway. It's changed now. I think you have to do
masters.
Yeah, it's changed. That was a while ago. But I was very lucky in that I got a job at Queensland Health pretty well not long after I finished. So I got my 2 years of supervision in a clinical practice environment working with
I remember you talking about the experience of Queensland Health, where you had a lot of experience with systems, with the legal side of things, with what to do, the correct protocols in certain circumstances. You did hospital work in that role as well, yes?
Mental Health Act, we had to learn that, everything. And we worked with other allied health professionals, all under the medical banner. Yeah. So, and we worked in teams. That taught me a lot, about all the types of things, drug use, the types of psychotropic drugs that are available. The education I got there, that was phenomenal, far better than I feel that I would have got had I chosen to do masters. And when I finished my honours, my supervisor, who was a very tough little Chinese lady, who said to me when I started my honours, you either get distinction or high distinction, or I don't be your supervisor. And I thought, oh gosh, I better work hard. But that's stead me in good stead. And after I finished, she offered to be my supervisor if I wanted to go along to continue to do a doctorate or a master's. But I was a mature student. I had a family. I had a husband who was going through leukemia by then, treatment. My mother was having strokes. My kids were
life was essentially falling apart.
Life was too full. I just wanted to get out and work. And I think even that pathway, so if I didn't do my master's when I had the opportunity of the doctorate, I got that marvellous opportunity to work with other health professionals, which I still think gave me more experience. So never ever think that you should have done this or should have done that. Make the most of what's thrown at you. It'll all be good.
Yeah, it all comes here, and so many people
come good. You'll get a use for it down the track.
Random life experiences come together.
Yeah.
And even
how hard it is.
Sorry,
I know how hard it is to make a choice. Should I do this? Should I do that? Just go with what you're dealing with and make the best choice for you. Yeah. You can listen to too many people and you can get overwhelmed. And even if you do get overwhelmed and you make a wrong choice, you can always sidestep again later on. It's not the end of the world.
We're really lucky in a country like Australia where we have the opportunities to go back and redirect ourselves and layer different qualifications on. So, I think we really have a lot of opportunity here, don't we? We probably need to wrap up fairly soon because we're almost at the half-hour mark. I know there's so much more that you could talk about with your role. Is there anything that you would say, maybe if you could sum up the pros and cons of your work?
Pros and cons. I tend to be a bit of a workaholic because I love my work area. So I tend to have to watch out for making time for me, definitely, because me particularly, I deal with a lot of people who have had traumatic experiences. I mean, really traumatic. I do a lot of counselling for victims of crime. So you can imagine what that, and so that's, you've got to be very, very careful to self-care and not take on too much work, and charge enough for what you're doing, because it's your lifeblood and your life passion going into this, and you only get one shot at one life. The other thing is to just make sure that you love the profession, because I do. So I chose that over doing visual arts and doing other things I could have done when I went to uni. Don't give up. Just, you'll have some subjects you hate, but get through it. You may not get as good a mark in those subjects, but that's okay, as long as you get a tick on the paper that you pass. That's the main thing, because you'll find your niche. What else? Gosh, not too much else. Just make sure you self-care if you go into it. But the other thing is, it's an incredibly rewarding profession. When you get someone who has been crippled, literally crippled emotionally for most of their life by these parts that are trying to help, like using drugs or behaviours that are just your firefighters coming up trying to give you some sort of balance in your life and feeling so bad to get you up, that coping strategies are not working. When you can get someone to heal those neural networks that heal those maladaptive schemas or mental thinking patterns or whatever, and install more positive cognitions into those neural networks that might have a verbal content saying, I am nothing. And you can install an opposite to that, or a mismatch that says, I'm not nothing. I'm great. I'm maybe not great, but I'm as important as everybody else. My life matters. And they actually come out of a session 5 days, as they say, before the memory reconsolidates. And they come out saying, you check in the next one and say, how much distress do you get when you think of that part now? None, it's gone. That is rewarding. And
you told me about a couple of your favourite experiences, and you don't tell me details, of course, but just some transformations that you've experienced in your work, and it sounds like it's an extremely rewarding career, because you really genuinely change people's lives for the better. And probably, from what I've heard from you, probably report writing would be the worst the worst side. But I suppose
once I get into it, I'm okay. It's just scheduling time, because it's easy to just, don't we all love parts of our job and parts of, it's about scheduling and making sure that you blot enough time out not to be too busy, and you really have to be quite careful of not that burnout. So the 2 points are, yes, it's one most amazingly rewarding career when you know people are healed. And you have your brain, if you cut yourself on the wrist, your body has an innate ability. You don't have to think about it. It can heal itself. The body has its own little system of healing. The little cells get to work without you having to think about it. Do you know what? Your brain has, your emotional brain and your whole brain has that capacity to self-heal too, given the right tools and given the right opportunities. You can either flourish or you can fall. We all know that.
You have some choice.
The right support, so your brain can, even your thing, when I say your brain, your mind. I don't mean the biological brain. That's just the bunch of neurons that hold all the information that we've learned over our lifetime. And the neurons talk to each other and share that information. Our mind, I'm talking about really our mind, I suppose. The mind has a capacity to heal given the right situation. And I
think we're seeing more on the mind and the power of the mind coming out in research, which is fantastic. And can I just add one thing that you might like to quickly elaborate on before we close? And that is, even though at the moment you're in private practice, you're not alone, are you? Because you're part of a bigger network in your region. And you still meet with what we call supervisions with other psychologists, so you still have that connection and networking going on.
Yeah, that's an obligatory part of being a psychologist. You must have supervision, because you can become isolated and you need it. We all need others to help us gain insights and get some ideas and share information. So the APS, the Australian Psychological Society, is the one I'm in, and the Australian, the AAPI, I've just joined it recently, the Australian Association of Psychologists Incorporated, I think it is. They're two professional bodies that I get emails from all the time. I have two people that I do video conferencing with. They're my main supervisory partners. And yeah, as I said, at the moment, I'm full on doing a graduate diploma in clinical psychology. So I'm also a member of the Australian Society of Hypnosis, ASH. So I'm also getting supervision from Dr. Barry Evans and Dr. Di McGreal. They're people in Melbourne who are involved in my lectures on that and my supervisions. So yeah, you do need that networking. You need to interconnect to know you're on track, to get back from others, and to also keep up with what's working and what's not working for others as well, so you can incorporate it into your practice.
Yeah, so there's an ongoing learning, and a lot of people
ongoing learning all the time.
Learning is
I guess the bottom line is I do love learning. I love learning. I've loved it ever since I was a child. Had periods where I did lousy at school for whatever reason. I had a horrible teacher once that really just smashed me. But then I got another teacher in the country and she was just gorgeous and I topped the class. So that reinforced that I wasn't a total loser. So you have these years where other people affect when you take that on board as a child. That's a trauma, by the way. I had EMDR over that with another colleague. And yeah, it is a trauma. You start to think you're not good enough or something when one particular teacher, and the reason she was horrible to me is I was off school for a long time at the time with they didn't know what it was, but it turned out it was pneumonia and pleurisy, and it took me a long, long time to get better, and I wasn't allowed to go to school. So I missed all the school. She just branded me a dunce, a failure, and I believed that as a child. I was only in grade 3, but then once I got past her and got another lovely teacher, I flourished again. So we all need encouragement, we all need the supervision, we need others to encourage us, because heavens above, there's a lot out there that'll kick us. So you can choose to listen to them, or you can choose to go to the people that are supportive and care about you if you care about yourself. Yep.
That's fantastic. But I think really it sums up. It's a profession that gives a lot, but you get a lot back. It's very rewarding because just to see people's lives go from floundering to flourishing, I suppose, would be just one of the most exciting things to be able to facilitate that. It's very, very exciting work. So thank you for sharing. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we close off? Yeah. Yep. So is that anything else you want to share? Is that it? No, that's it. Yeah, I'm still going. I might be going for the that's one last thing is maybe, there aren't going to be, unlike something like labouring, you can as long as your brain holds out, you can do work. You do, but it's sometimes it's you have a bad week and you think, I often do, I'm tired as I'm getting older, and I think, is it really worth me putting particularly when I've got heaps of reports to write or something, and I'd rather be watching a movie like all of us that's my firefighter coming up, go and eat something nice that's full of sugar, or get up a movie instead of writing that report. The procrastination. But once I actually sit down and start, I find that it flows. You've got to trust your own training, you've got to trust your own knowledge, you've got to believe in yourself that you can do it, even though it's not the most pleasant part of your job. But often the report writing, I always try and tell myself that that's helping a client, that I'm doing that on behalf of the client. And of course, the standard I like to keep personally is that that's about me. If I write a good report for a client, that's going to help the client get what they need, whether it's a support letter or just a letter for court or something like that. And it's going to, if I do a good job of it, that's my personal values, that if you do a good job, it helps, it improves your professional
professionalism and the respect that others have for you, but it helps the client too if it's a good letter. No use writing anything and then it comes out and called it's a lot of rubbish, you know. So it's a two-way street all the time between you and your clients.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing today. And we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you at the event on Monday, the 21st.
Okay, right, bye.